Well, hello, good evening, everybody who's joining us. Thank you very much for joining us at this live Q&A about the Camberley Great Stink that has been affecting the lives and businesses of so many people over the last, it must be about 6 weeks now, I think, since the first reported smells were being kind of mentioned on Facebook and elsewhere. This is an opportunity for residents, for business owners and others affected to ask questions of people who have been to the offending site and who have built up a really good knowledge of what's been happening there over recent times, and who can perhaps also give us a far better sense about where we can go in the future as a community and indeed as a borough council. I'm Dr. Alistair Pinkerton. I'm the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for here in Surrey Heath. I'm going to pass over to Morgan to say hello, and then to Lisa and Kel.
Hello, I'm Councillor Morgan Vise, and I'm the portfolio holder for Net Zero Wellbeing and Environment, Surrey Heath Borough Council. So environmental health and this sort of issue falls under my portfolio responsibility to make sure everything is getting sorted as we can.
Thanks, Morgan. And Lisa and Kel, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Lisa Finan-Cooke. I'm a ward councillor for Watchetts ward, which is the ward adjacent to where Thames Water is situated. And I'm also a portfolio holder for housing and inclusion.
I'm Kel Finan-Cooke. I'm also a ward councillor for Watchetts, which is the ward neighbouring the offending sewage works. And I'm also a portfolio holder for economic and income development.
Thanks very much to you both. And I know that Watchetts has been one of those wards in Camberley that has been most affected by the smell because of its relative proximity to the site. But before I think we get stuck into that, Morgan, I wondered if I could just turn to you first of all, maybe just to explain a little bit from your knowledge and your experience, what is going on here? What has been happening over the past 6 weeks? And then we'll come to Lisa and Kel and hear a little bit more about the impact that it's having in neighbouring wards.
Yes, absolutely. So the issue here is the odour that everyone's been experiencing and been suffering under, which is a result of imported sewage sludge, is the technical term I've been told, or that has been brought into the Camberley sewage works. And this was due to a series of unplanned outages across the Thames Water network. Which meant they had to move their sewage to strategic sites, otherwise there would have been further problems. So this happened earlier this year. However, the real kind of severity of this didn't really come into play until June, when with the hot weather and with the wind direction, the sewage smells really started to be horrific and very unbearable for residents. And my Lisa and Kel were receiving complaints, as well as the other ward councillors in the St Michael's ward, who we've been working closely with as well. Those complaints started to come in, and then the council stepped into action. So it was in mid-June that the council wrote to Thames Water to highlight this problem and to get a response from Thames Water on what their responses were. And since then, unfortunately, there's been a series of commitments made by Thames Water that, in my opinion, haven't been met. We were told that the sewage would be handled, and then it wasn't, that it would be sorted, and then it wasn't, then there would be an odour suppression system put in place, and it wasn't. And it was on earlier this week, on Monday this week, or so on the 1st of August, the odour suppression unit was finally put in place onto the imported sewage. So this was months after that the sewage was originally brought into the site, and still months after the first sets of complaints were being brought in. And it's been months-long saga where residents have been essentially trapped in their homes because of the smell. So the council have been doing, we've been liaising with Thames Water. Our environmental health officers have been making inspections there. We have written to Surrey County Council and the Environment Agency, to highlight the issue to them. And I know that the Environment Agency has made an inspection of the site just to make sure that they are in keeping with their license, because this is how the system of sewage works and waterworks kind of operate, is that an operator is awarded a license. So it's to make sure that they are in keeping with that. And the fact is that Camberley still has an inordinate amount of sewage left to process. They've said it's going to take another 4 weeks. They said that months ago. So it's what I've been doing, and what I've been doing in conjunction with Lisa and Kel and the ward members for St Michael's and other councillors as well, is holding Thames Water to account and saying, this is what you're promising, this is what your commitments are, you need to make sure you are doing this. And it's important that we continue that, holding them to account well after this event has been handled, because we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. So that's a brief overview of the issue where we have been so far.
Thanks, Morgan. That's a really helpful introduction to the whole challenge. Now, you mentioned Watchetts and St Michael's wards as being the two most affected wards here. And it'd be wrong not to say, of course, that the St Michael's ward councillors have also been working really hard on this issue, as have other people as well. But let me just turn to the two representatives from Watchetts. Lisa and Kel, could you just give us a little bit of a sense of the impact that it's been having in your part of kind of Western Camberley and the western part of Surrey Heath? I mean, I hear reports on the news and elsewhere about people literally not being able to open their windows because the smell has been so bad. And I've certainly smelt the smell at Watchetts Recreation Ground and Camberley Cricket Club. So the smell is travelling a long way from source.
It is. I mean, to be honest with you, it's coming right down as far as the border with Frimley ward. You know, the spread of this odour, I think, is beyond anything that we've ever experienced before. I think residents like ourselves who live in close proximity to the plant, we experience this on a regular basis. It's actually an annual occurrence. But the state of play with the extra sewage has meant that it's really just beyond the pale in terms of what we normally experience. And I think the impact on residents, and we estimate that it's impacting about 6,000 people. And certainly in the immediate surrounding half mile, families there and people living in their homes are unable to enjoy their gardens. They're unable to have their windows open. They can't open the door. They are reporting feeling nauseated, and having visited the plant and living in close proximity myself, I can understand that. So I think the impact has been absolutely huge. And just to sort of put it into perspective, the first lot of sewage arrived on the site in February.
Yes.
So sewage came on in February, it came on in March, it came on in April, and it came on in May. So even though that sewage wasn't being processed, Thames Water took the decision to continue to add to that tanker until it's full to capacity. And myself and Morgan were there during the week. And I think we've got a picture to show a little bit later.
I can bring up these slides now. This would be a good time to do it.
So there you go. This is the tank that's absolutely full with this excess sludge. This is the stuff that can't be processed on site. It needs to be, the moisture needs to be removed from it, and the cake needs to be taken off site. But this is 4 months worth of stuff that's been brought onto this site. And I don't know, Al, if you want me to speak about the rest of what's in the photograph. Yeah, so
I think this would be a really opportune time for you to do exactly that, because you were there, you saw it, and I think you obviously had the explanation about what we're seeing in the picture.
Yeah, so I actually took this photograph. So from where I'm standing taking this picture, if you look along the right-hand side rail, you can see a blue hose pipe. And this goes along this full side of this rail. And I think from memory, there was maybe 8 or 9 nozzles that you can see here spraying out this mist.
There's a kind of vapor coming out of them.
Yeah, it's a mist. It smells very much like fabric conditioner. And the idea is that this disperses into the atmosphere, and they use the term nullifying the odour. But I can tell you from being there that it absolutely does not nullify the odour one little bit. And I think what concerns me most about this, or what I was most disappointed to see, I suppose, is that this measure, this odour control measure, is just along one side of this tank. And I think I don't know if you're able to bring up the other photograph of the tank from a distance.
I can, yes.
So this sort of gives you an idea of the size of what we're talking about here. I mean, it's no wonder the odour is as bad as it is. It's absolutely huge.
You can in fact see in this picture, Lisa, you can see the little trails of vapour just running along the top of that hose pipe there.
Yeah, and they don't really go anywhere. I mean, they're not. It's not really strong enough to disperse any distance into the atmosphere. So, and we know, and residents have reported that actually it hasn't made a blind bit of difference to them. I mean, one of the things that has been frustrating through this process is that we've been told a number of times that this odour suppression has been running 24 hours a day. Now, it came to light that that hasn't actually happened, and it's really only in the last 36 hours that it's been running 24 hours a day. But even then, it's really not making any difference at all to residents' experience. So the impact is massive, absolutely massive.
And what you can also see, which is from this photo and from the other photo as well, is that it's an open tank.
Yes.
It's essentially, it's an open tank with tons and tons and tons of raw, untreated sewage where that odour is literally just going up into the air. And that is what I find really shocking of how there are no covers, because even if it was a cover or it had a roof or a lid, that would then contain that odour within the tank. And that is, I think, really something Thames Water really need to look at to make sure that they're doing this, because it's not just this is their emergency tank, which Thames Water have admitted the Camberley sewage works is not designed to have imported sewage. So this really should not be happening. This imported sewage should not have come to Camberley. They've admitted that. But if you are able to bring up, there's another image which you've got of an aerial, you'll be able to see.
Yeah.
So all of the circular tanks as well. So that's where.
Let me remove that blue area. So the circular tanks we can see in more or less the centre of the photograph.
Yeah. So those circular tanks, which are the kind of the bottom of the site, the southern part of the site, that's where those are all open as well. So that's where the day-to-day sewage goes, and that's where so those are open. So that, if you think that's the closest part to the residential area of Watchetts and St Michael, so that's already the annual smell that Lisa mentioned. But if you just to the north of it, you can almost see the two tanks, which in this image are empty because you can see the green bottom of the tank. But those tanks are now full to the brim of extra sewage, and that's almost double the amount of what would normally be in those tanks, in those circular tanks, is there as well. So that's the fact there is no lids or covers on those tanks is quite shocking.
It also means that when there's poor weather, the issue is exacerbated because it's not being given an opportunity to form a crust, which would contain the smell to some extent. Every time it rains, it's just, releasing that smell into the environment, which is obviously, we know we've had a very, very wet July, which is why our residents have suffered to such an extent.
And we've had sorry, Alice, to keep cutting in. We've had the combination of it being wet, but it still being quite warm as well. So it's almost like that the heat makes the smell worse. And as Kel just said, when the rain hits it and it agitates it, it makes the smell worse. So it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. And as Lisa already said, this sewage started coming into the site in February this year. So it's been sat there for months and months.
I think
almost 6 months.
Yeah, almost 6 months, as you say. I mean, I think the public will find a lot of this very surprising and possibly shocking. That first of all, that this waste has been accumulating over such a long space of time. Secondly, that the tanks with this externally, I don't know how we call it, externally produced waste that has been brought in from elsewhere, first of all, shouldn't be here because Thames Water have acknowledged that this site is not appropriate for the processing of it. but also then rests in open tanks. I mean, and just to confirm, Lisa and Kel, that blue pipe, when Thames Water talk about odour suppression measures or mechanisms, they're talking about that blue pipe. There's nothing else.
No, that's it. We envisage some kind of very clever fan and filtration system, but no, it's the equivalent of blaster Febreze.
Yeah, and on the other tanks, so Thames Water, and this is another issue I've had with Thames Water, is that in some of their statements, they've said they have they've been saying this for weeks now, they have a 24/7 odour suppression unit on site. They do on the already existing tanks.
Right.
So this one, so where you can see here, this blue piping with that mist, that was installed on August the 1st.
So this actually comes to a question that I've been asked, and maybe this is a useful point just to transition to questions. We've got a couple that have been asked during the call that I can bring up in a second, but in advance of the call, I've had several emails, including one from Claire. I won't say where Claire lives, but Claire is obviously really concerned about this. She's been directly affected by it, and one of the issues that she has raised is the inconsistency in what Thames Water have been telling her over time. And I think I read in one of your Facebook posts that you've also been struck by the inconsistencies in what you've been told as well. So she asks, why has the story from Thames Water changed depending on who I speak to? I've had 4 different reasons for why this has happened. And also she raises this point about the odour suppression system apparently being on 24 hours a day when that's clearly not been happening, and it hasn't had any effect on the smell. What is going on with Thames Water that is leading to the very inconsistent message that we're getting from them?
They're just not used to scrutiny, Al, is what the issue is. They've not been called out. They've not been held to account at any period before. And we've gone to them with questions and they've fobbed us off with, the easy answer. And as we've gone back and we've had further meetings and we've really grilled them, certain things have come to light. So they're having to keep changing the message that their call centres are giving to residents because they're actually, revealing the truth to us. Right. And we are putting a lot of pressure on them to be honest with residents. We really feel that if people are honest, they know what to, if they know what to expect, they know how long this is going to be an issue. If people keep telling them that, it will be solved by Monday, then that's when people get angry. When people got the truth, they can deal with it. But Thames Water just haven't been doing that. They've been, kicking the truth can down the road. And every time we uncover their mistruths, they're changing that messaging to residents. Yeah.
And there's been real failures of their communication lines from the plant to Thames Water Corporate, to the communication they're putting out, to the communications with the council, to their communications they're putting out through their contact centre. There's been massive inconsistencies. And as Cal just said, it's always hoping that if we say it'll be solved next week, people will just stop talking about it. But it's not, because it's not going away. And they haven't been doing it only now, because we have been applying, even each time they've come back with their new truth, we've been applying greater pressure onto them. And it's only now that they're starting to realise that they actually have to be upfront and honest about what's going on.
Mm.
And when we met them on Wednesday, I was very clear about that. As Liberal Democrats, we talk about transparency and honesty all the time. And I made the point to them that actually, we need that transparency. We need to know exactly what's going on. And it's not too much to ask because, the moral responsibility that they have to the residents who live around them is huge. And being truthful is the beginning of that. And I think people can be very generous. And actually, if they realise that, an error was made, stuff was brought onto site that shouldn't have been brought on, people can be understanding. But it's the misleading nature of those communications over time, again and again, despite pleadings from us to really be honest with us. That's infuriated residents and it's infuriated us. It's been a long, difficult process to get onto site actually, and to see for ourselves exactly what's going on. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me was learning that odour suppression system hadn't been operational 24 hours a day when we were telling residents it was. And, you know, it's very, very unfair.
Yeah, it's put you in an invidious position because all you can do, you're not specialists in this area, but all you can do is reliably pass on the messages that you're getting from a company that have been less than fulsome with the truth. I mean, to be generous, we could use other words to describe what they've done. And I think this also comes down to the fact that they've fallen short of their commitments to communicate with residents as well. Was there not a story of them putting out a leaflet through all 6,000 affected doors, or a large part of that? Has that happened? Do we know?
Not yet.
I don't believe that has happened, no, but that's what they have. What they have said they were intending to do was to provide a letter drop to the immediate vicinity. I don't know if that's happened, but I think something did happen. But again, it included the incorrect information. So residents, again, were receiving information that was incorrect. And that just infuriates and frustrates the whole process because it completely degrades the trust of anyone that has in Thames Water. So it's a real failure by Thames Water, in my opinion.
What I recall is that we met them on the 24th, didn't we, Morgan?
Yes.
And they put a statement out in the following couple of days saying that they had written to impacted residents on the 25th following our meeting on the 24th. And that was on their website, I think. I seem to remember it was on their website. And so, you know, I asked residents, right, who's received this letter?
Nobody.
Literally nobody has received a letter. And when pressed the other day, nothing has gone out. And I've given them a list of streets where I know residents have been impacted, so they should receive something at some point. But that's literally as specific as I can be because I really don't know when it's going to get to them.
And another problem that we've had as well is that for the vast majority, I think nearly every resident, their primary source of information regarding this has been the information that we've been distributing from Thames Water. So it's Thames Water have given us incorrect information. We have been saying that, and because at the beginning we took Thames Water as on their word.
Yeah,
because they accepted and admitted the problem to us, and they said, yes, this is wrong. This is going to be fixed by X date. So we then informed residents, and then that date came, not fixed. Yeah. So
the issue is every time we've asked when it will be fixed, the answer is always in 4 weeks.
Yes.
And for the whole 8 weeks that we've been investigating this, and our fellow councillors have been investigating this, the problem is going to last 4 weeks. And I really don't think we can downplay the huge effect this is having on residents. This is their summer holidays. This is when the kids are off and they can't go into their gardens. They can't have their barbecues. They are feeling unwell when they leave their homes. Yeah. And to be told basically now that all of your summer holidays are gone, and let's face it, it'll probably be into September for the last of the nice weather that you're not going to be able to use your gardens either. And the impact of that is huge. So to keep being told 4 weeks is completely unacceptable.
This actually brings me to a question that I'm going to ask now. This is from Kevin Thompson, who in fact is one of the Lib Dem borough councillors over in Lightwater. And he asks this question, with hot weather forecast for later in August, how confident are you that this issue is now under control? I mean, again, I don't want you to have to speculate too much on this. You did talk about the fact that the weather has in a way exacerbated this issue already with water and of course the heat. I don't think there's necessarily any great promise that the hot weather is going to immediately form that promising crust that you just described before. Are we looking at a situation where things may get worse before they get better?
I fear they might, Alistair. The odour suppression to me isn't sufficient, right? I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer, right? I'm literally a lay person. I'm just a resident who went to see, right? You can consider me as that. And the way that misting flows, it needs to really be around every side of that tank. And I don't understand why it's only along one side.
And it's being sprayed towards the ground as well, isn't it? It's not.
Well, it is going straight out, but it's not getting any further.
Well,
but what I'm concerned about, and I can say this as somebody who's experienced living beside this plant or near to this plant for 17 years now in this house. So I can tell you that every summer we suffer. All right, so the hot weather makes it worse because hot weather makes it ferment and makes it all horrible and disgusting, and it creates more odor. And wet weather makes it bad as well. But every summer we suffer. So in answer to the question, at this moment in time, I'm personally not confident that we will see an improvement until that sludge is processed and taken off site.
I would have to agree on that as well. I am not confident that this issue is under control, because the reality is, this happens every year. Yes, this year has been kind of exceptional.
Yes,
but they have not, in my opinion, put in the work needed. Are they processing the sludge? Yes, now very slowly. Do I think this is going to be resolved in 4 weeks? I don't. I have to say I don't think so, which is why our environmental health officers at the council are keeping on them all the time and making sure that they're kind of they are staying committed to it. Because again, the council has been burned essentially by this now. Is that it's also the council's reputation. So the council is taking this incredibly seriously, and also I'm not confident that it's going to be fully resolved, unfortunately.
I mean, just given the description that you've offered to us this evening of this waste accumulating over nearly a 6-month period of time, that tank looks, to my eyes, to be almost full. And they're obviously waiting until it dries out and it turns into before they can process it. I just can't see how that can be done in 4 weeks, given that it's accumulated over 6 months.
So yeah, there's like a centrifuge system. So they spin it to get rid of the wastewater, which is then processed, and it forms a solid which dries out, and then they can transport it, and that generally gets sold to farms and things like that. But they can't process it quick enough. And we were told that the senior staff at that plant, when they were first delivered all this excess sludge, they were entirely overwhelmed because they didn't feel that they could actually process it in a timely manner. It was, it was too big a workload for them because they were already processing, the indigenous sludge. So it's going to be a very long process, because let's not forget, it's not a static thing. We've got our own waste from our own residents being processed every day as well. So I don't see how it can magically be done in 4 weeks when it's been sat there for 6 months because people cannot process it.
Just to give you an idea, I pressed very hard when we met on Wednesday to understand how much of this sludge has actually been processed. So of all the sludge that's come onto site, that is, come from external sources, they've processed about a quarter of it, is what they tell us.
Okay.
But that's nowhere near where I would expect that to be, given that we began speaking to them probably 6 or 7 weeks ago now. It's very, very, very slow progress.
It seems to be very disappointing, particularly if they're still offering that 1 month duration to completion. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize that is an almost impossible target to meet.
They've had to essentially bring in extra equipment to do this centrifuging process, which I'm not going to get in, because it's essentially, as Cal said, they have to spin all the liquid out of it. It becomes solid, and then that solid is then. But they've had to bring in extra equipment, kind of temporary equipment, to handle that, because they can't process it through the site. So they should have been that this process should have started in February, and that's something we've pushed them as well. Is like, why was there no plan in place? Because yes, there was an emergency. But that emergency should have also come with the plan to process it, and there wasn't. And that's the honest answer, is that they couldn't answer that question because it was clear there wasn't a plan put in place to deal with this waste. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if we hadn't kicked up a fuss, if residents hadn't been affected as badly as they would have, that waste would just still be sitting there. And it would sit there until someone kicked up a fuss. So that is what we've been doing, from the ward councillor level and from the council level as well.
That's really appreciated. It does actually bring me back to Claire's question, or one of Claire's questions, which was, why were Thames Water allowed to do this in the first place? And perhaps that raises the question, why did they feel the need to bring this exogenous waste onto this site in the first place? And Claire's question dovetails neatly with this question from Matt Hodges-Long, who has written this question while we've been on the call. Do you think this issue is related to the widely reported financial issues Thames Water are facing? I'm not going to ask you to speculate on Thames Water's finances, but we have heard that Thames Water are in some financial difficulty, that their infrastructure is failing. And this, from everything I've read, there does seem to be a case to be made to suggest that their sites elsewhere have failed, which has forced them to then relocate this waste, this sludge, to Camberley, which itself is inappropriate for handling it. Is that broadly, have I grasped that broadly correctly?
Yes, I think so. I think the reality for Thames Water is that they're operating on a severely outdated and under-resourced and under-invested infrastructure system. So they are now, it's the way I can only see it. And I am not an expert. On this. I can only imagine that the infrastructure that Thames Water is working with is just failing. And they are constantly having to fix things, put in repairs, which has then resulted in these unplanned outages, which has then kicked in their emergency system. So I can only suspect that, yes, there is the financial issues that Thames Water are facing is leading to an underinvestment, that Thames Water are placing their shareholder interests above the interests of the residents that they're serving. And I also think that there is a failure by central government here. They are not regulating these industries properly. They are not providing the investment to make sure that we actually have a sewage system that works. I mean, what happens when a sewage system fails? Yeah. I don't want to imagine what that looks like. Yeah. And the fact is, we have a system now that is forcing an overwhelming amount of sewage onto a site which Thames Water have admitted they are unable to handle without extra help. So this is my real concern, is that while Thames Water are saying this is unplanned and this is never going to happen again, unfortunately I can't see how it won't happen again.
They did admit that they didn't have the resources to take that back to the plants once the plants that had outages were back up and running. They just didn't have the infrastructure there to take it back to be processed.
Right.
So there is a big chink in the armour somewhere. But we did ask the question of them, why was the decision made to bring it to Camberley, which is a plant which is right in the centre of a residential area? There are plants which are further out of town where the impact would have been much less upsetting for people, and they couldn't answer that either. So it almost looked like it was a geographical issue. Just plunk it in the nearest one and worrying about it later.
And can you just remind me what Claire's question was? It was why they were allowed to do it. Sorry,
why they were allowed to, rather than why they felt they had to. So there is a question about permissions here, I think.
So they
are allowed.
Yeah,
they are allowed to do it. And that's the unfortunate reality of the way the system works, is because in an emergency, the sewage has to go somewhere. Otherwise, if they didn't put it into the tank in Camberley, it would have started backing up into someone's house. Right. And that's what nobody wants that. But what they have failed is, so they're allowed to do this. And I think it's right that Thames Water do have those emergency procedures in place, because that's only the right and proper thing to do, to have that in place. But what they haven't failed to do is then, what's the next step? You have an emergency procedure, but what's that next step? How are you dealing with it instead of just dumping it somewhere and hoping no one notices? Yeah, that's where Thames Water have failed, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now you talk about next steps, and I think that is where we need to move to at this particular point, because we've been speaking for about 35 minutes on this issue, which is frankly not something I ever thought we'd speak for more than half an hour about. What is the next step? What can the community do? What can residents do in order to keep this very, very much kind of in the spotlight? What can they do to put pressure on Thames Water? And Claire, again, has asked her very final question is, can residents expect or hope for any compensation? She feels that her life has been materially affected this summer.
I would agree with her that her summer and her life has been materially affected. I can't say if there's going to be compensation because I don't know. And I think the likelihood is that the answer is there won't be any. The next step is they need to process this, they need to get rid of it, and they then need to make a decision on the suitability of Camberley sewage works for the long-term future. And if either they continue as they say that Camberley is not suitable and they remove Camberley from their sites for the emergency process, or if they accept that it is, then there has to be further mitigation put in place. A proper odour suppression unit, which goes around the entire tank, lids or roofs or covers that go on top that can trap that odour in.
And can stop the water agitating the surface.
So those are what I would expect Thames Water to do. Thames Water also need to make sure that they are running an odour management. They run odour management surveys, but I want to know when they're doing that. Are they doing it in the right month? Are they doing it in
couldn't
December
answer that, could they? They said that they did them a couple of times a year, but couldn't or wouldn't reveal when they do that. And when we pointed out, well, was it done in summer when most of your complaints are, they didn't know. So we asked for copies of those surveys, but haven't yet received.
I think they've just come through because they did show us parts of it. I need to check on that. But also, what Thames Water have said.
Just on the odour surveys. On Wednesday when we met, they said, once this is processed, we're going to undertake an odour survey.
Once it's processed.
And I said, so you're talking about September? And they said, yes. I said, well, in September, the odour goes away because it's over those critical summer months. So I've pushed them very hard to push that survey out to June when I feel the odour will begin to rise. And I think that reflects residents' experiences year on year. Yeah. So we need it to be assessed when it is actually impactful.
But interestingly, there doesn't actually seem to be a maximum odour limit as set by the government or by the terms of their licence. That there's no upper limit.
No, I don't think there is. And also,
the surveys reveal the level of smelliness, but that doesn't necessarily then trigger a mechanism or a breach of a permit or license or anything like that.
No.
So just to go on what the council can do, there are powers that the council has in terms of odour nuisance. However, it's very restrictive in terms of the ability, and it has to be essentially proved that there was willful kind of breach of the license, and that they are not doing anything to solve it. So if the council
it has to be that negligence, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's difficult to prove currently because the Thames Water plant have put in the mitigation now, as much as it's late, or they have had a plan. Yes. Yeah. So that would be very difficult to prove at the moment. However, I have asked officers at the council to explore legal options, and that then led to us writing to the county council and to the Environment Agency, which have much broader powers, discretionary powers, which then led to an inspection by the Environment Agency. But also, what I was going to say something, and it slipped my mind. It's
what does the Environment Agency do in this situation, Morgan? Do they have a kind of governance role here?
Yes, they do. So they are kind of there. I think they may be a partial regulator with regards to waste, but it's also they will be looking at a much more of an environmental health impact as well. So not necessarily the treat. It's what does this sewage mean as an environmental health nuisance, the impact onto residents as well. So they'll look at that. But I was going to. Sorry, my brain has gone then.
While you think of that, maybe I'll come back to Lisa and Kel with a question that's just come in from Kate McGowan, who asks, how do they actually measure odours in the first place? Were you given any sense of the devices, the mechanisms that they use for measuring odour levels?
It's air samples.
Smell machines.
It's air samples. And I know where Kate lives, and I know that she's been heavily impacted. I mean, we did see like a contour line map, which was overlaid over over a map of the area.
Mm.
And the inner contours obviously were where it was most strongest. And then the outer contours were supposed to be where you can't smell it at all. And I can tell you that I'm in that outer contour and I can smell it. And way beyond that outer contour, we have had reports of the smell as well.
In fact, the majority of complaints have been from outside of that contour area.
Yeah, well, for us, certainly,
for
yes.
us, yeah.
Yes.
And
I was at Camberley Cricket Club a few weeks ago, and we got out the car, and the smell was overwhelming. And you know how far away Camberley Cricket Club is from the site. But maybe the wind conditions were just optimal to be blowing in that direction. But I think that heat map, that intensity map, would be really interesting to see whether residents would map the smell in the same way that Thames Water mapped the smell.
And that's something I'm very keen to hear. And I remember what I was going to say is that Thames Water have said that they don't receive a lot of complaints about this site. So what I would say to everyone is that if you live in this area and you have to make these complaints, because that is how you will drive action. Make complaints directly to Thames Water, because what I think happens, and I grew up on Park Road opposite Watchetts Rec, and I remember the smells, but you become used to it and you bake it in.
No, that's a shame.
I thought he might be going. I mean, the point he's making is that residents over time have gotten used to it, and it's very easy to notice it and think, "Oh, there it is again," and not report it. But it is incredibly important that we do report it. I mean, to give you an idea, when I suggested that this was an annual problem, I was met with a series of shocked faces, and I don't for 1 minute believe that residents in St. Michael's and Watchetts wards haven't been complaining year on year. I know that they have. We need to continue to build that picture up over time, because we need to be able to demonstrate that they need to do something to address this problem. Otherwise, it's going to reoccur again and again. It's imperative that we give them the information they need to make informed decisions about the measures that they put in place to protect residents.
And what is the best mechanism for airing these complaints? Because we can all go onto Twitter and complain on there, but presumably there's a dedicated complaints, email address, telephone line that Thames Water make available to residents.
Yes,
Morgan, you have that information to hand there, yeah?
Yes, it is. So it's to make a direct complaint directly to Thames Water. And the telephone number is open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Well, I hope that's the same it is, and not as what they said their Otis question was. But the number is 0800 316 9800. Or you can email them, and that email is customer.feedback@thameswater.co.uk. And it's making those official complaints directly to Thames Water is how they get included in any statistics. Making complaints on Twitter and Facebook is important to build a community response, but it always needs to go back to that direct complaint to Thames Water. Even making complaints to the council sometimes doesn't always make it all the way through. So what I'm going to ask the council to do is, if the council are receiving complaints about the smell, is that any of the advice, and that's something I should have thought of earlier, is that any of the advice given from our contact centre at Surrey Heath is directing residents to the Thames Water complaints system as well.
I think they are doing that as well. I do think they are.
I'm pretty sure they would. I'll make sure.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get the phone number that you just mentioned, Morgan, so I can pop it up on the screen. And while I do that, can I just give you one other question that's come in?
Please.
It's great that we're having so many questions. Gina asks, have you heard from any Hawley, Blackwater, or Meadows area representatives about issues, I guess, of smell going the other way? I guess the issue is that we have a westerly prevailing wind in the UK, so the smell is of course blowing over Camberley, probably down towards Frimley, certainly Watchetts and St Michael's, and probably isn't travelling the other way, or at least not traditionally.
Most of the time, I think you're right about that. I think that is the case. However, I do know from people I know in Blackwater and Hawley particularly, that they do get it from time to time, but certainly not in the same way that we do. And I know Gina is another resident who has been talking to us very regularly. I know she's been heavily impacted as well. It's brilliant to see that residents are engaging with this. So thanks for logging on and asking these questions. It's really good to have you with us. So I suppose we haven't heard from members in any of those areas at the moment, and that wouldn't be unexpected because the prevailing wind is coming our way.
Yeah.
There you go. That was very very efficient.
And also, I think as well, where the sewage works is with the prevailing wind, to the other side of the sewage works, there's industrial units, so that may be kind of breaking the odour going that direction. Whereas when it comes our way, there's nothing to stop it rolling over residential areas.
Yeah,
and so that's something where I haven't had, as Lisa said, the council hasn't had any representations from Rushmore either.
So the message really is that you're on top of it. You have now witnessed the site for yourself. You've recognised that the truth hasn't always been told. That some of the mitigations look to be recently installed and probably look inadequate. But the very best thing that the community can do is to keep complaining directly to Thames Water. Thames Water need to know that this is an issue not just this year, but it's a perennial issue during the summer months. And it sounds like we are now on top of this, or we now know that this is an issue. We know that there are inadequacies in terms of the odour measurement regime that they have, which it sounds like you're going to hold them to account over as well going into the future. So I think these sound like really positive outcomes. I suspect, though, that the problem is going to get worse before it gets better. So I don't think the community can necessarily expect a quick solution because of the difficulties that Thames Water have got themselves into by loading up this tank that they are now struggling to process. Is that a fair summary of what we've got to?
Yes, I would agree.
I think so. Yes, but the community need to keep the pressure up. It's over. We're doing it from the inside on behalf of Surrey Heath. But the more complaints they receive, the more pressure it puts on, and the less likely they are to consider Camberley as an overflow site in the future, because they don't want this level of grief. So we all need to be registering our complaints day in, day out to make it just simply not worth it for the management at Thames Water.
If you think it's unbearable the smell is unbearable, but we need to make it unbearable for Thames Water. Yes. And that's kind of the way we need to treat this. I can reassure residents that the council takes this incredibly seriously. It has been the thing that the environmental health team have been dealing with recently, with me, with our strategic director. We have been on them constantly. We are pushing them as hard as possible to make sure they are living up to their commitments. And our officers feel this personally as well. They feel really let down when they've given us the information in good faith from Thames Water, and that information has been incorrect. So I promise residents that we are taking this incredibly seriously.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kel. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you to the other ward councillors elsewhere, and also to the council officers who I know are working really hard on this issue as well. The message is that the public need to make a big stink to equal the big stink that they are currently enduring. And the best way to do that is by phoning, by emailing, and I don't mind saying it, by publicly shaming Thames Water into action. This should not be happening. I fear that the lack of investment in Thames Water's infrastructure means that this is going to be an issue for years to come. But we need to basically start making sure that they are held to the terms of their license, and that they're good neighbours that they should be, particularly in a residential area such as Watchetts and Michael's and that western part of Camberley. Thank you so much for joining me this evening and for answering all of those questions, and of course to everybody who tuned in and asked such fantastic questions. I'm sorry that people are suffering this summer. Nice to see you all, and we'll catch up again very soon. And thanks to the public who have been here this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.